Hi guys, I'm Rudy Babikian. I'm here with Old Florida Fly Shop today. I'm going to be showing you guys a little fly. It's kind of a combination between the Schminnow and the Avalon crab. It's been proven very successful for the snook on the beaches that around here and all the way up to the northeast and several different species in between. It's a very versatile fly. You can make it in several different variations, and yeah, it's been a great fly for me. So hopefully it works for you guys, and let's get tying. This fly, we're mimicking smaller bait fish, and the reason for that is these snook, they do like big bait, but I like to throw a smaller fly. They think about it less. So what I'm tying this one on here is a SC15 number 1. Gives us a smaller pattern, and yeah, it's been working well on the beaches. It mimics those pilchards quite well. So I start with the SC15 here. I'm going to use 210 Danville thread, flat waxed, and start at the eye, work your way back, covering that whole hook shank there, and back again. Get right up close to the eye there. Trim off your excess. The next step, I'm going to go with a plume or two of this marabou. I like to take off the tip here, and then you'll see the marabou, it's got majority of the feather, it's all even here. So all that clump is about the same length, even though they're further down. So in the middle, they're longer. In the top, they're shorter. And then once you get down to a certain point, you'll see there's a taper. I normally take that taper off. And that gives us a nice clump of marabou. And then normally for this pattern, I'm going to go about 2-3 times the length of the hook shank. And again, you can tie this fly anywhere from a 1-0, 3-0, 5-0. I've gone really big for some of the striped bass I fish in the northeast, and you can go really small for some of the bonefish and permit that you might target. But start with this marabou, tie it in starting close to the eye there, and working your way back down. This does not have to be pretty. This will all be covered. Just make sure that the tail is on there evenly. So one of the reasons I tie this marabou in first is because this is going to create a base for my dumbbell eyes or my bead chain eyes to go onto. When you have a bigger base here, it's going to give more grip for that dumbbell eyes or bead chains to attach to the hook shank. So I don't like to go all the way to the eye. You'll see that's going to get bulky here at the end. Get that on. Oh. Gonna get my bead chain eyes here. And something important with these bead chain eyes, a lot of people forget, is these bead chain eyes, they've got these little, they've got these little points here at the end where you trim them, and a lot of the times these trimmings can actually cut the leader, and you can lose a lot of nice fish doing that. So I always poke these guys in, takes a little bit of pressure. That one's already in, so we're good on that one. Work our way back, and I like to give not too much space, but enough space that you're going to be able to create or be able to tie the wire bite. So classic figure 8s. Make sure that's on evenly. That looks pretty good. The next step is going to be getting the wire bite. People use beadline. I like this wire bite stuff. It never really rusts out on me. It's durable. I like the 30 pound for this size. Some of the larger size, when I go up to, say, 5 millimeter tungsten beads that I'll put on here in a second, I go up to 40 pound. But this 30 pound for these smaller beads seem to work really well. Grab about 1.5 to 2 inch section of that. Start tying it right behind the bead chain eyes there. Work it all the way back to the tail. Cover that. And then the next step, very important, just to secure everything. And I normally use a lot of this Zap-A-Gap throughout the process of this fly, just to make sure everything is secure, it never slips, never turns on itself, and creates a much more durable pattern in general. I always put a decent bit underneath the bead chain. Give that a second to dry. I normally do a couple wraps just to secure everything there. And that's the tail of the fly. After that, I'm going to use this Chocolate's Finesse Game Changer material. It's kind of like a dubbing brush. And I'm going to just strip off a little bit of this. Just make sure that that glue is nice and dry there. And again, none of this to this point has to be clean, even. All this is going to be covered up here. So once you got that, you're going to slowly palmer this braid up the shank. That's good, right around there. Get right behind the bead chain eyes. Do a couple wraps to secure it there. Trim off the excess. Fold everything back. Get a couple loose or tight wraps right behind the eyes. The next step here is going to just be to trim off, which will be the underside of this Finesse Game Changer material. So I'm going to trim that, make it nice and flat. Next, I'm going to grab a couple of these tungsten beads. I just grabbed the slotted ones because they have the nice white color that matches the fly nicely, but that is not important by any means. This is where I like to vary this fly quite a bit. I will, depending on the reason I like this fly is when I see a snook or a striped bass, or any species for that matter, when you're sight fishing them, normally these fish, they're going to be cruising a line. And when they're cruising this line, it's really important to be able to lay the fly out in front of them and have that fly sink down and you know exactly where it is. When you're fishing in the surf, you have a lot of water movement that you don't notice. So when your fly lands, it might end up 10 feet further away from where it lands by the time a fish crosses it. So I always match the beads that I'm using with the surf size or the amount of beads. So the more surf, the more beads, the more stable that fly is going to be on the bottom, and you'll know exactly where that fly is. Where it lands is where it's going to be, and when that fish crosses that point, you give it a strip, and they'll normally eat it. It's not too important which side of the slotted tungsten goes on. Oop. The standard for me is using, what are these, 3.8 millimeter tungsten, and I'll do about 3 of them, and that's what I like to use those in your medium to smaller surf. When you start getting into the bigger surf, that's when I start using bigger beads, more weight, or you can just compensate by using more beads. I don't like to have a big hoop on this bead chain or this wire. I like to keep it relatively tight, but something that's very important about this fly, and one of the reasons I've had good success with it, is again, it sinks to the bottom. Once it sinks to the bottom, you start retrieving it. Snook like to feed up, striped bass. A lot of the species that this fly has worked well with, they like to feed up. So it sinks to the bottom quickly, but when you start stripping it, these beads go to the back of the fly, and what that does is it lifts the head and allows that fly to ride a lot higher, a lot quicker, as opposed to like a big heavy clouser head, which is just going to keep on digging into the bottom. But this, because the weight transfers from the front to the back, it allows it to shoot up a lot quicker. So this wire, I normally go through the eye here, cut off a little bit of, leave a little bit of a tag there just so you can fold it over and tie it in. That makes it a lot more secure. Give it a bunch of wraps there. And that is about it. Very simple fly. I like to use my whip finishing tool. Give me a second here, I'll grab that. Put a little bit more glue on there. And something that you can see, it's not the prettiest fly, but something that's important that I've been seeing a lot of people mess up with recently is they use human senses to judge flies. So I had a buddy recently tell me, which was one of the dumber things I've heard, was he told me he can look at a fly and tell me if it's good. And I do not believe that's true at all, because humans, they use sight. Fish, they use vibrations, they use noise, they use smell, they use senses that are not sight. So when we look at a fly and we say, oh, that's a great looking fly, the fish, they might use their lateral line to feel it, or they use other senses that are their primary sense rather than sight. So this fly, not the greatest looking fly, but it's got a few concepts in it that make it very efficient. With the good keel that you have here, the weight transferring to the back, allowing the fly to shoot up quicker. This big bushy head here to allow a lot of movement out of this marabou tail. And another thing that I like about this fly is you can tie it really bulky, and depending on what bait fish are out there, you can always trim it down to whatever you want. And white for me is always the go-to color because it's a great fly, and on top of that, you can change the colors quickly with a quick permanent marker. But this is the fly, I think we're calling it the Schmavalon at this point. It's been a good fly for me, up and down the East Coast here, and all the way down to Bahamas and several other locations, but hope you give it a try and hope it works for you.